All right, joining us today on Pirate Radio Live, Matt Present, the voice of Appalachian State men's basketball. Matt, how you doing today?
I'm good. I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for coming on. So baseball season wrapping up. App State's done, ECU's done, but the College World Series still going on. Have you been keeping up with that at all?
Yeah, I've actually been following that more this year than perhaps any year before. I grew up a pretty well-rounded sports fan, but it's kind of funny just where my interests lie right now. I've watched a little bit of the NBA Finals, not a whole lot of the NHL, and even this weekend, I was more locked in on the College World Series than I was on the U.S. Open. So I don't know if that's just kind of where having a Sun Belt school represented and having some really good baseball being played, or if that's kind of just happenstance. But yeah, it's been fun.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat. Normally, I'm watching every finals game, every minute of it, but I have barely watched any of that. I've been locked in on the baseball as well. I guess it's because I've covered almost every ECU baseball game. I was in Conway for the regional, so I don't know if it has to do anything with that, but I'm surprised at myself for watching as much college baseball as I have this year. So, App State finishes season 23-31 in baseball this year. What were your thoughts on the season and just how everything wrapped up there?
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly a disappointing finish to the year. The team started off conference play well. I think 7-4 through their first 11 conference games, and they were a game out of first place. And certainly the early season conference schedule was a bit more favorable than the schedule down the stretch. But just a combination of some injuries, some poor play, and just kind of the ball not bouncing App State's way down the stretch led to a disappointing finish to the year. But I think at the same time, you look back at the recent history, and App State entering the 2025 season was coming off back-to-back 30-win seasons for the first time since 2012, 2013. The 2024 season was the winningest year since joining the Sun Belt. And so I still, even despite kind of a bumpy finish to the 2025 season, feel really good about where this App State baseball program is headed.
Yeah, and in the world of NIL and the transfer portal, it's hard to really just get a feel for how things are going to be in the future. ECU's lost 15, but 15 have announced they're returning. How's things been for App State with the portal so far?
Yeah, it's I think probably a little less active than maybe the numbers that you're throwing out for ECU. There were a couple notable departures in Tyler Lichtenberger, who is the Sun Belt Freshman of the Year, and then Tyler Figueroa, who was also an All Conference selection. So certainly some disappointing losses, but at the same time, App State has had tremendous success in the transfer portal in baseball. I think particularly in baseball compared to any other sport. I think App State has had a ton of really notable players come through the last few years. If you look back, Austin St. Laurent from ECU, a guy that was drafted last year by the Seattle Mariners. Banks Tolley comes from Ole Miss, where he was, kind of a fourth or a fifth outfielder, and he's an All-American selection last year. Xander Hamilton comes over from Virginia Tech, and he gets drafted. C.J. Boyd from ECU, the program's all-time leading home run hitter. And so I think, even despite losing a couple of key pieces in the 2025 season, this staff has shown a really good track record in their ability to attract talent through the portal.
And you mentioned the staff there. Heath Blackman, former ECU director of player development, now the pitching coach for App State. Have you read up on that, heard about that at all? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I haven't gotten a chance to meet Heath yet, but I'll tell you what, I'm so in addition to my duties as a play-by-play voice for App State, I'm also a part of our strategic communications team. So I had a hand in the announcement of Heath Blackman, and kind of going through that process and researching him and getting in touch with people who know him and who he's worked with, like there was an overwhelming sense of belief in him and an overwhelming sense of just what an incredible guy he is. And I think sometimes, if you ask someone pointedly, like, hey, is this guy a good guy to work with or a good guy to be around? Like, people are more inclined to say yes. People are more inclined to, say positive things. But when you have people just going out of their way to praise someone effusively for the kind of person they are, just in an unsolicited way. I think it really speaks highly of him, and hopefully that's a sign of good things to come for App State on the pitching front.
Yeah, did a great job with pitchers at ECU, helping out Austin Knight there. Heard nothing but great things about him from players, coaches, and other people involved with ECU baseball. So get a good guy at least in the building. That's a plus. But transitioning to, well, I guess this would really just cover everything. The House versus NCAA settlement. It's confusing, but it's not that confusing. I mean, $20.5 million to each school to spread across the sports they want to. Just what were your initial thoughts when you read about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm someone who is generally interested in, kind of the intersectionality of sports with the law and society and all those sorts of things. So, dating back to, high school or college, the issue of if players could be paid and how they could be paid. I mean, I think I had a college class where I wrote a paper on, I guess, what ended up becoming NIL, but was not, termed that, a decade ago or so when I wrote it. So it's been something that I've followed fairly closely for a long time. I guess my takeaway is I'm glad that the NCAA is trying to be proactive and trying to put more guardrails and more of defined structure in place. I think that's something that has really been lacking the last few years. I think just about anyone who works in college athletics, whether it's on the staff side or the coaching side, would tell you that the most challenging part of this industry right now is just a lack of clear rules and parameters. So I think the good news is that the NCAA and Charlie Baker have done a really good job of trying to put that structure and those rules in place. But in the same token, I think that as much as the efforts are well intentioned, there's still going to be a number of legal challenges and practical challenges when it comes to how this comes to fruition. And so it'll still be very interesting to see how it plays out, and see how that changes things moving forward.
Yeah, I'm just interested to see how it affects the mid majors. Like, will it help ECU App State compete on a national level in some sports, or is it just going to be the rich get richer? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I think in terms of, you think of, let's take baseball as an example. The roster limits are going from, you know, somewhere in the 40s to 34. And so if you think about every single high major team that now has to cut 6 players from their roster, well, now the talent pool for an ECU or an App State or any other school at the mid-major level, and I think there's an argument to be made that the Sun Belt is a high major conference and that the American is a high major conference, but regardless, the talent pool for those schools, the access to that talent has an opportunity to grow. But in the same token, the ability for the group of 4 schools to be able to fully fund every single scholarship available to them within that limit is going to be different than the ability of some other schools who don't have the same financial resources. So I think in some ways it will help the schools outside of the Power Four, but in other ways, the ability to use those scholarship and other financial resources to attract the very best talent. I think the pendulum continues to swing in the way of the haves as opposed to the have-nots.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. Matt Present joining us, voice of App State men's basketball. It was recently announced, I think last week, 2 weeks ago, ECU and App State are going to do a 4-year home and home series. I'm a big fan of that. Whenever we can get these regional rivalries in Minges or on the road is always a plus for East Carolina fans and just the athletes themselves, because I mean, y'all play a lot of West teams. I know ECU got to get on a plane, go to UTSA, go to Rice, just go so far for no reason. But what were your thoughts on the home and home series?
Yeah, I'm with you. I think it's great. I think it's great for both schools. I think it's great for the region. I think that the Sun Belt has probably a more favorable travel schedule than the American does, just in terms of the geographic layout of the conference. But I think, anytime you have conference realignment, I think we've seen that the travel and the rivalries and the opponents get spread further and further apart. And so, yeah, I think it's great to have two schools that I think are on pretty similar footing. We certainly have seen the enthusiasm and the passion for the football series that has been in recent years, and so hopefully that translates to similar sentiment to a basketball series. And I'm certainly looking forward to coming to Minji's next year and to have this on the calendar for the next 4 years.
Yeah, looking forward to it as well. ECU kept a couple of players. They kept some star guys in Jordan Riley and Jay Shane Woodard, also Reed Case and a big guy. But R.J. Felton, C.J. Walker gone, our top two contributors last year. What's App State's roster looking like in basketball?
Yeah, I think App State's in a similar boat. They had C.J. Huntley, who right now is going through the NBA draft workout process, and we'll see where things fall for him here next week. But he was a key contributor, and then Miles Tate at the point guard position. Those two guys really shouldered the load, and both have exhausted their eligibility, in addition to a few others who've departed. And so, there certainly are some young contributors that saw rotational minutes last year, but they were not, the lead guys in terms of production. And so there's a combination of guys who are going to need to step up and take that next step developmentally, whether that's a guy in the guard spot like Alonzo Dodd or a guy in the front court like Luke Wilson. But I also think this team has done a really good job throughout the transfer portal this offseason. I think the guys that are probably most intriguing are a guy like Kason Jennings from South Florida. That's a program that has certainly had some good success in recent years. And then Aaron Banks, a guy that App State knows well, who transferred from Georgia Southern, a guy who can shoot it long, really long, and active perimeter defender, I think is where he might make the biggest impact. And then a guy that I think it might be the most intriguing, and I guess in some ways you call him a returner, in other ways you call him an addition. Andrew Njak is a player who joined the team before last year from Switzerland, ended up getting hurt before the season, so he used a red shirt. There was conversation that he might use a developmental red shirt regardless, but watching him come back from injury, even in a season where he didn't play, but continued to work out with the team the tail half of the season once he was starting to get his mobility back and return to full health. And he's a guy that can, I think he's a traditional kind of European big, a guy who can step out and shoot it, a guy who's very technically sound. And I think he's a guy this coaching staff is really high on. And so to have a guy who was around the program last year but didn't play but has his skill set, I think is really exciting.
What do you think the outlook is for App State basketball this year? How far do you think they can go?
It's funny. I'd love to give you an educated prediction. I say this without intending to cop out, but I have no idea. I think the track record of this coaching staff is really good. They've been above 500 or 500 or better in all 6 of their seasons at App State, just a year removed from first place finish in 2024. And, certainly it's a staff that's produced really good results. And so I think that would lend you to believe that they would be a top 6 team in the conference. In the same token, I would also be an advocate that preseason predictions and polling in the transfer portal era, especially for a sport like basketball, where there seems to be, a majority of guys turning over, or at least, half the guys turning over, and you have, just a couple guys that can be so impactful in that sport. Man, it feels like such a crapshoot every single year. You see the preseason all conference teams announced along with the preseason poll, and you kind of shrug your shoulders at this point. How accurate could it really be? So, I think that's kind of my answer. I think the track record suggests that this team will continue to have success so long as Dustin Kearns and his staff are here. But in terms of what that looks like with a largely new group of guys, and even if you have 1 or 2 guys leave, the chemistry and the dynamic of every team is slightly different, and you could say that for all 14 teams in the Sun Belt. So it'll certainly be interesting to see how that all comes together.
Yeah, ECU and App State kind of in the same boat with basketball. Just in modern college athletics, you really just got to see what's on the field, court, baseball field. Whatever it is. But Mike Schwartz has continually got better, so hopefully it's another good year for ECU basketball. Before we talk a little football, there was a question posed last week by former ECU basketball coach Mac McCarthy, and I wanted to get your thoughts on it. What has impacted your view of college athletics the most? NIL, transfer portal, or conference realignment?
Man, that's a good question. I guess I impacted my view in what way?
It could be positive, it could be negative. Just I said for football, it's conference realignment because you get more of these entertaining matchups early on in the season. But for like basketball and baseball, I'd say transfer portal, just because when the baseball season ended, it's not like, all right, let's move on to summer stuff or football in the fall. Now we got to sit here and wait to see what's going on.
Yeah, I would probably say for basketball it would be the transfer portal. Certainly all those things I think are some degree intertwined with one another, but I think the biggest thing is you get to the end of a season and regardless of if it's a successful season or an unsuccessful season, right now you get to the end and you have no idea what the team is going to look like 6 months, a year, let alone 2 or 3 years from that point in time. And certainly that's challenging to navigate, but it's the reality. And that's not an App State problem or an ECU problem. I just think it's something that the entire college basketball world has had to grapple with and ultimately adapt to. But I think in terms of it impacts the game in so many different ways. It impacts how the coaches spend their time because they are recruiting 12 months out of the year. You're not recruiting a specific class that's going to come in and be with you for 4 years. You're recruiting an individual team for your very next season. And certainly you're still trying to look beyond that, but the way you allocate your time and resources has changed significantly. And then your ability to develop chemistry is limited. It's different. Your ability to scheme X's and O's, I think, has also changed, and I think we've seen. Um, yeah, I think the individual player talent level in basketball continues to grow, but I think, with the exception of some really elite coaches and teams, I think a lot of teams are doing really similar stuff and really stuff that might be more simplistic than in years past because you don't have 3, 4, 5 years to develop a guy in your offense, right? You're tailoring what you were doing on offense and on defense to the guys that you have that year. And so I think because of that, there is less sophistication perhaps, and so I think it all looks different, but I don't say that it necessarily is a negative or a positive. I just think there's so many different areas within the sport that have had to change because your time with a particular player or group of players looks so different than it did a few years ago.
Yeah, Matt Present joining us a little bit on football. Joey Aguilar goes to UCLA and then to Tennessee in the span of a couple months due to the Nico Imalivia thing. But who's going to be starting for App State? I know y'all brought in J.J. Cole from Iowa State and A.J. Swan from LSU. Has there been a designated starter yet for the beginning of the season?
No, and I would not expect that we get an announcement on who that starter is until the week before our first game or the day before our first game. I think a lot on that is going to be held pretty tight to the vest. And I think, when we talked about the turnover on the basketball side, but there's been a ton of roster turnover on the football side. And certainly, I would expect that as our football staff, Dowell Loggins and company, go out and recruit both, through high school and through the transfer portal, they have an idea of where they see certain guys plugging in. But until you get them on campus in the summer, until you go through fall camp, I don't know that they know, right? I certainly think that they have a hunch and that they, as they go through the process of bringing in players, have projections. But I would think that just about every position is written in pencil and not pen at this point.
Yeah, it's crazy. Clip Brock, the host of our 3 to 6 show, he talked to Corey Glore of Tulane the other day, and you just think Tulane, hey, they're going to win 10, 11 games, maybe compete for a playoff spot, win the American. But even they don't know who is going to be their starting quarterback. So it makes me appreciate what ECU has right now in Caden Hauser. We already know who's going to be starting week 1. There's no pressure, no stress to try and figure this out. So it makes me appreciate him a lot more. And before we let you go, rumor, report, whatever you want to call it, on Twitter this morning about the Sun Belt Conference reaching out to ECU to gauge interest. I don't think anything's going to happen to this, but what do you think about that?
Well, I think it kind of goes back to our conversation about what the basketball matchup means. I don't know that it's going to work out from a conference standpoint, from a high level financial standpoint.
Yeah.
Like, there's so many things that go into what makes a team a fit and what allows a team to make a jump from one conference to another. But if you set all that aside and you simply say, would it be good for ECU to be in a conference with App State, and would it be good for App State to have ECU in the Sun Belt? I think the answer is yes. You have a team that is of similar stature. You have two very passionate fan bases. You have the proximity. I think from those kind of perspectives, and kind of the Sun Belt has always tried to prioritize regional rivalries, and so I think that probably is largely the reason that if this report is true, that the Sun Belt would have reached out to ECU to try to gauge interest. But yeah, we'll see. I have no sense of how likely that is, but I think you and I probably agree that it would be fun if it were to come to fruition.
Oh, yeah, it would definitely be fun. I mean, Dowdy Ficklin being packed out last year for the App State ECU game. Whenever ECU goes to Boone or they play in Charlotte, being at the Conway Regional this year against Coastal Carolina, it makes a lot of sense when you see those games being played. But obviously, you got to figure out the money and the financials. So that's where I get a little iffy on. I don't think it's going to happen. I don't really know if I want it to happen based off how much money we'd be getting. But Matt, thanks for joining us today. Hopefully we can get you in studio whenever you come down here for the basketball game.
Sounds good, Jarrett. Thanks for having me, and I'd love to do it.